Hello and welcome back. You know how I said last time that hopefully it wouldn't take so long for the next video to come out? Yeah, that was a fucking lie. Yes, so the game took longer than I expected it would do. That in combination with a holiday and sickness. Well, here we are now. Now let's stop beating around the bush. You can read the title. It's Fire Emblem Three Houses for the Switch. You play is insert name and gender here, where you have this weird dream in this black void where you talk to this sassy lost child whose importance will become clear later. You are then woken up by your dad, who tasks you with protecting a certain group of individuals who are trying to get to the Officers' Academy from a bunch of bandits. This group consisting of Edelgard, the heir to the Adrestian Empire, Dimitri, heir to the Kingdom of Fargus, and Claude, heir to the Leicester Alliance. After you all fend off the bandit, you escort the three students to Garrick Moor, who I can only describe as this weird combination of high fantasy Hogwarts if it was also the Vatican. It is run by Archbishop Rhea, who is the head of the Church of Seros, as well as the leader of the Knights of Seros, that your father Gerald was actually captain of at some point. At this point, Rhea just up and decides to make you a teacher at the academy, despite not being much older than the rest of the students. And it's here you get to choose which house you decide to teach. The option being the Black Eagles, led by Edelgard, Blue Lions, led by Dimitri, and the Golden Deer, led by Claude. At this point in the game, the campaign is pretty much the same regardless of which house you chose, as what starts out as just basic training and teaching somehow manages to turn into a grand conspiracy against the church, seemingly being led by an individual called the Flame Emperor. So other notable events is that your character is revealed to be able to wield an ancient relic that used to belong to a warrior named Nemesis, who was defeated by Seros, the founder of the church. Your father getting murdered by one of the spies of the Flame Emperor. The sassy lost child being revealed to be Sothis, who is actually the god that the church worships but has lost her memories, and she eventually sacrifices herself and her powers to free you from some black void that you were trapped in by one of the Flame Emperor's underlings. At the end of the first half, it's revealed that the Flame Emperor is actually Edelgard, who wants revenge on the church for personal or traumatic reasons. And by one way or another, your character gets knocked out and wakes up 5 years later in a ditch. And here's where things get interesting. You see, depending on which house you chose to teach, will determine on which side of this now ongoing war you'll end up on. For example, if you decide to teach the Black Eagles and get your affinity high enough with Edelgard, you're given the option to side with her in the war in taking down the other nations as well as the Church of Seros. However, if you chose not to side with her or didn't have high enough affinity with her, you will side with the church in taking her down. However, if you decide to teach the Blue Lions, you will then help Dimitri on his path for revenge and redemption to regain his kingdom and also defeat Edelgard. However, if you chose Claude and the Golden Deers, you will then side with him, who, while also wanting to defeat Edelgard, is also interested in figuring out what's actually going on behind the scenes, and asks the questions that the player is probably asking at this point as well. As expected, the game could get kind of convoluted at points, and you'll have to play through the game at least several times in order to understand a modicum of what's going on. Well, either that or read the Wikipedia. The gameplay can be separated into two specific halves. The typical Fire Emblem part, which is basically your typical tactical turn-based RPG. This is probably the closest to Chess 2 we will ever get. And the more chill, almost Persona-esque parts at the Officers' Academy. Let's tackle the first part, well, first. The battles involve a battlefield set up in a sort of square gridded pattern, kind of like chess. But unlike chess, instead of moving one character or piece at a time, you move all your characters on a single turn, and then your opponent moves all the characters on their turn. Some characters can have more movement options than others. For example, slower, heavier units have less movement range, while as mounted units have higher movement range. And Pegasus and Wyvern riders can pretty much fly over everything and have probably the highest amount of movement range possible. Magical and archery based classes can attack their opponents from a distance. Certain weapons and classes have more or less effective against other classes. You can gain XP in battles and level up, in which point your stats increase. And they also borrowed a mechanic from Fire Emblem Echoes, where you can rewind some of your turns if you get yourself in a bind, but you can only do that a limited amount of times. The other half of the game primarily takes place around the Officers' Academy at Garrick Moor, where you can talk to the students and staff, buy items and weapons, gather resources, repair weapons that break, or have conversations and build up affinity by either giving characters items or having tea with them. Lovely. You can also go on optional missions, and educationally you can teach yourself or your students new abilities and skills, or increase their affinity with said skills, and also take exams where you or your students can respec into a new class, depending on if you have the right skills to do that. The higher the skills, the more likely you are to succeed in that respecing class exam. And if your affinity is high enough with certain characters, at the end of the game you're given the option to marry them. The graphics are decent for the Switch, while the character models are pretty good. The environments on the other hand can be a bit crusty and undetailed at times. And while there are some pretty cool pre-rendered cutscenes, the majority of the in-game cutscenes primarily involve a bunch of characters standing around talking, which I suppose is a step up from the handful of static images that were in the previous games. And thankfully Music Meister's finally back to do some music coverage. Thank you, Chris. My apologies for my absence last time. The music is mainly electronic and I'd say reminiscent of many shonen / fantasy themed anime, I suppose. There's some pretty good singing in some of the soundtracks, as well as some organ music in the more monastic based settings. Most of the battle music is very run-of-the-mill for what you expect, except in one of the levels where it has this weird prodigy / dubstep music for some reason. Thanks, Music Meister, it's good to have you back. This game is really good, and for what I've seen, most other people seem to have the same sentiment. I'd say it's worth giving you a go if you're just trying to get into the series, or if you're a hardcore, long-term player who only plays the game at the highest difficulty with permadeath on. I'd say it's a good investment of time, even if it can be a bit long and repetitive if you're going for all the endings. In fact, it took me so long that Nintendo decided to renounce the Switch 2 while I was playing it. So I guess we'll see what next instalment of this franchise will come up on that system. Either way, that's all from me. See you guys next time. For my head.